Welcome to a data mesh learning panel hosted in conjunction with the Data Mesh Radio podcast. This is a panel where we ask members of the general data community to discuss a specific topic, where we can have people that drill down and give their opinions instead of just kind of having these one-on-one discussions, such as the interviews on the Data Mesh Radio podcast. The people that are on these panels are only representing their own views, to be clear, but it's important to have more and more perspectives come in. And so we are looking to do a number of these panels in 2023. So if you have a topic or you want to participate in a panel, please do get in touch. You can find me in the Slack. We'll also be having the new team that is going to be owning and kind of running the community. They're going to be looking for additional people as well to do content like this. I want to make clear as well, people from underrepresented groups are especially welcome as panel participants. So with that as the little bit of introduction to the background around this, please do enjoy this awesome panel with some great members of the general data community.
All right. Hello all. I'm Juha Korpela from Ellie Technologies, hailing from snowy Helsinki. With me today, we've got Veronika Durgin and Kent Graziano. Veronika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, Juha. Can't pronounce your last name, not even going to try. So I'm Veronika. Very nice to see you all. Very nice to hang out with Juha and Kent. So introducing myself, I'm currently overseeing data at Saks. I've been doing data for a while, and I guess sometimes I make people solve the equation for X to figure out how long I've been doing this, but I'll tell you. So I started in 1999, and the only reason I say that is because I had the joys of working through the Y2K bug fixing. At the time, I didn't really understand or really care why we were doing it, but it was fun. But I've been in data my entire career. I did a whole bunch of different things. I was a DBA, data architect, data analyst. So I have really a lot of appreciation of what's happening and kind of how we grew over the past 2 decades.
Excellent. And how about you, Kent?
Hey, so this is Kent Graziano, the data warrior. Happy to be here on this discussion today with my friends Juha and Veronika. I'm sure we'll go crazy on this whole conversation we're about to have. We can get pretty geeky on our conversations for sure. So get ready for it. So I've been in data for a very, very long time. I was the Chief Technical Evangelist at Snowflake for a little over 6 years. I retired from there a year ago. I'm now, just doing a little advising on the side with some Snowflake customers and in the data vault space. I've been a data vault master. So I really say I've been a data vault evangelist since basically it started back in the early 2000s. I was a data modeler long before that. I've been doing data modeling since, the late 80s, I guess. So been through a lot of different iterations on data modeling and seen a lot of changes in our industry over that time. So really excited to have our conversation today here on the data mesh community about what's going on these days and where data modeling fits in.
Exactly. Thank you, Ken. And that's the kind of segue to our topic today, which is data modeling. And I think it's a topic that doesn't get covered too much in this data mesh context. So I'm quite interested in what sorts of rabbit holes we find to dig ourselves into. But this is kind of the overall idea here, that we would discuss what data modeling kind of now means in this context, maybe what has changed, what hasn't changed, which is also interesting, and how data modeling as kind of an activity and approach to things really fits in with the idea of decentralization and federated things and data domains and so on and so forth. So quite eagerly waiting for the interesting results of this discussion. To get us started now, Veronika and Kent, I think one of the kind of important things we have to get straight, like right away first, is that the fact that data model is kind of considered an engineering activity in much of the discussion relating to data mesh. I mean, you will probably read Zamak's book and whatnot, and it doesn't mention data modeling too many times at all, I think. But I think what we need to start with is kind of figuring out some basics. We do have modeling on different levels, right? So we also need to cover kind of both the kind of macro level of what data modeling is in the data mesh in the grand scheme of things, and then the kind of micro level of how to do modeling best in those domains and in a more kind of engineering way. So what are your thoughts on this? I saw, Ken, that at least you had a little laugh there, as I mentioned that this is mainly considered as an engineering thing nowadays.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably one of the trends, because it tends to, the term gets used in the data engineering space a little bit, and this is one of those classic, I don't think that word means what you think it means, when people are using that, because yes, there are certainly engineering aspects to data modeling, and there is, we'll say, I guess, really physical data modeling that applies more at the engineering level. But as you all know, Juha, it's way beyond that. It is, done properly. It should be done with a business perspective, and that's kind of, like you said, the macro level. When I started out in modeling, doing what we used to call entity relationship modeling, it was business focused, and I've never gotten away from that in my career. I mean, it's always, you have to start with a business focus, and even in the data mesh world, the data mesh world is business focused, right? It's, we're talking about delivering value to the business from data domain teams, and those domain teams are organized around business domains that happen to be responsible for data in the organization, right? So I think that's one of the first misnomers and first maybe misconceptions is that it's just an engineering thing. It's like, oh yeah, you just let the DBAs, the database people, they can figure that out, and that's really a very short-sighted view on data modeling. That it is broader than that. It has to come from a business focus if we're really going to be building, a data mesh, right? Where we're going to have interoperability between the different domains. In order to do that, you've got to have a way of communicating between those domains, and we have to agree on what we mean by the things that we're talking about, and that's where the data modeling really comes in. It's a question that has come up, and I think even I've talked to other people about this before in the past. When I first started at Snowflake, the questions I would get is like, well, how do we need to model differently for the cloud? And it's like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, is there something about the cloud that we should do the data models different? It's like, different from what? Right? It's like, there's different ways of doing data modeling. We can talk about all around those, the old third normal form relational modeling. There is, some of the things people did in the NoSQL world with JSON and documents. There's the traditional, I'll say, data warehousing approach of dimensional modeling with star schemas, and then of course the data vault approach, which Veronika and I are like steeped in quite a bit, and that's just for starters, right? But I gotta step back and go, well, we really need to be thinking again about this at a conceptual level, at a business level, and that's not an engineering thing. That's a business conversation on what does this data mean? What does it mean to the business? What's the definition? How are we going to agree on these things so that we can have this interoperability between these domain data teams? We got to have a way to converse, right? And be in agreement, and not be saying one thing and meaning something else.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I think the core here is exactly that this is about those business domains. So how do we figure out what is going on in those business domains unless we understand the data model on the level of the business? The individual decisions of the kind of engineering projects within those domains are kind of a different topic, although of course those also need to be somehow derived from the kind of overall data model of what the domain is actually about. You mentioned Data Vault there, and I think Veronika, one thing that I might kind of point this question to you towards is in Data Vault world, we are kind of focusing on the business entities as the kind of very core of everything. We have the hubs and we have the links and everything. Everything is centered around those business entities, and they have business keys and so on. And you guys are far better in Data Vault than I am, but I do like the approach because it focuses on these business entities. So how do you see the kind of semantic understanding of business entities when we are talking about different domains? Data Vault approach, for example, basically all the approaches require somehow that we have a common understanding of what a customer is or something like that. But now that we are talking about federated domains that might have a different understanding of that, considering that especially Data Vault forces us to focus on those core business entities, how do we find them when the domains are all different?
That's a great question. And for full transparency, I'm not building, I don't have experience building data mesh. I'm taking the best parts out of data mesh concept around data products, but I mean, businesses have core concepts. There aren't, three definitions of customers. There's maybe some flavors of it, right? The important thing to me is actually defining those business keys, because that's what's going to create that interoperability across domains. And I love I've said that before to Kent. I don't like data mesh definition. I like data marketplace, because like I absolutely love that terminology, because to me a marketplace, when you put something on marketplace, it has to be a product, right? It has to have a definition. You have to know exactly what you're getting. There's quality around it, because you're not just going to go and just get something, right? So to me, like that's what we're building. We're building something that has all of those definitions around it, and then it's easy. Like you can go and buy tires for your car anywhere, because they'll fit, right? Like they're defined, they're the right size, and you put them on your car and they work. So to me, that's kind of like how I think about it. But customer is a bad example because I don't think anybody ever can like really truly define their customers. And customers constantly change and evolve, right? Businesses grow, they change, they explore different opportunities. So let's not talk about customers.
No, it's a good point. I think customers and products are the single most difficult things to model in any organization.
Oh, yeah,
I
you got to
bet.
tell you about that.
Yeah.
I did a master data model for HP back quite a long time ago. We had 500 entities by the time we were done to define the full breadth of what HP meant by a product.
Yep. Yep. That's how it goes. Yeah. But I think this is kind of an important point here, and we aren't even very deep into what data modeling is and does, but we're already at kind of a challenge, right? That yes, we said that data modeling has to start from the business. It has to be about the business entities, and of course, especially in the Vault methodology, that's like the whole core of everything. But now we are already now here in a situation where we recognize that we will not be getting kind of a clear understanding that would be shared by every domain of some of these core entities, what is a customer, what is a product, and so on and so forth. So we're always going to have this kind of a problem with the semantic interoperability, so to speak, that do we really understand what the other domains are about? And I think data modeling is the best we have in attempting to get that sorted out, right?
Yeah, and I think that's part of this conversation too is back to similar to what I was saying before about the cloud is the question being asked is, well, if we're doing data mesh, do we need a data model? And the answer is, well, yes, but it's not necessarily one single data model. Each of the domains and needs to somehow be able to represent to the other domains what data they're looking at, what data they are putting into these data products. And in our terminology, we call that a data model, right? Uh, does it, there's a lot of debate even, does it need to be visual? It's like, well, I'm a visual guy. I like seeing the diagram, right? Pretty pictures on the wall. That's, a great communication mechanism. It doesn't have to be very technical. It doesn't have to have all the data types, all of that, but it needs to have words that people understand so you can have that discussion. So the customer domain and the finance domain can have a meeting about the interoperability of the data, and the customer domain can throw up a picture. Here's the things, here's the data we have access to, here's the data that we as data domain experts understand, and that you're all looking to us to provide quality data in the form of a data product for you to consume. Well, here's what it looks like. And then the finance domain can show theirs as well. And then they can have that conversation. And if they both happen to have customer on their diagram, well, now that can facilitate a conversation about, well, what do you mean by customer, and what do you mean by customer,
Right.
and who actually does own that data, who has access to that data, who should be stewarding that data and cleansing that data and productizing that data for the rest of the organization. Because in the end, I mean, the conceptual data model, at least at the semantic level, is just that. It's a concept. It's not necessarily, we don't want to be down at the engineering level and saying, well, here's our 20 tables and here's our 40 tables, and oh, we've got this data here and that data there. You might want to have that conversation a little earlier, right? Before we do that, maybe we've onboarded the raw data and we can start looking at it from that perspective, as a domain team. But even being able to like reverse engineer that, take that raw data, whether it's flat files, JSON documents, or actual database tables, and get it into some kind of a document, a diagram that can be easily shared. Then we can start having some conversations between the domains about who really owns what. Because data mesh does talk about governance. We've got to have the governance in there, right? And the thing you absolutely don't want your data mesh to turn into disparate data silos, where the same data is in 2 different or 3 different or 5 different places, being brought in potentially from the same source and represented differently. And I don't know how you do that without having a model to look at and at least have a conversation about.
Exactly, and I think, Veronika, you mentioned quality there. I think this is kind of an aspect of quality, really, that in our data marketplace we document what the
Right.
products are about, right?
And again, not kind of like bad mouthing data mesh as a name. It just, to me, marketplace speaks like there's a meaning to that word. But to what you said, Kent, definitions, plain word English definitions. It is incredible. You don't like integer strings, nobody cares. Like, what does this feel like? Customer, you know, like I come into you with a customer and you come to me with a partner. Is it the same thing? Is it not the same thing? I wouldn't know if there isn't just a plain English definition or whatever language you speak, right? Like just words, use your words, like kind of going back to toddlers, right? Please use your words, explain yourself.
Yeah, I think that's criminally underrated, right? In this whole like data business, we're so keen on all these different file formats and whatnot, and ELT pipelines and so on. And, maybe some English words here and there would be pretty good occasionally as well. But I think that also comes kind of down to the governance aspect. Kent, you mentioned the governance, and it's kind of also part of the trustworthiness of that data marketplace. Really, is it governed? Can we trust it that the data is what it's supposed to be, and so on? But there's, I think, also some kind of an aspect of this governance which is differently governed from all those technical details. Like the mesh literature talks about APIs or whatnot that enforce governance and so on. But now what we're talking about here are things that are related to people and plain English language definitions of things and your pretty diagrams on a wall and so on. So that's not necessarily as easy to fit into those kind of technically oriented governance schemes that we usually talk about or encounter when reading about data mesh. I don't know how exactly that should be solved, but I kind of feel like modeling is a topic to be governed somehow. And even though the act of modeling might happen in the business domain itself, we have to kind of ensure that we're all modeling at least similarly enough that we can figure out what's the overlap and what's the connection there.
Yeah,
Which is, I think, where data vault comes in, right? That's where you're going
Good
with.
point.
there you go. Well, and
Ooh.
even talking with the folks at Roche who are at this point world renowned for data mesh, they settled on doing Data Vault, and one of the things that they talked about was they started off with one team. It was basically their core team as they were investigating data mesh. They had that conversation. It's like, if we're all going to be on the same page, we need to have some standards. And I've talked in the past with folks about having a center of excellence that basically helps set those standards. And that's like the top level of governance, in a general sense, is how are we going to communicate with each other? Who's allowed to do what, who's allowed to change what and where, all those kinds of conversation. Like, as you said, Veronika, you have to use your words, but hopefully these things have to be written down somewhere. And it doesn't have to be, we don't spend months and months and months doing this. It's got to be, much quicker than that. I mean, that's kind of the point of data mesh, is delivering value a little more quickly. But, how do you go about doing that? And the Roche Diagnostics team decided, well, we're going to use Data Vault, because Data Vault is hubs and links, as you mentioned before, are really business focused. We're talking about the core business entities and the relationships between those entities, and we can talk about that at a non-technical level using words that business people understand, because that's how you're going to validate that. And we used to do that even way back when I first started doing serious data modeling. We would ask the business questions from the data model. Is it true that a customer can have one or more accounts? That's a yes or no question, right? This, hope it's a yes or no question. Of course, there's always that it depends little aspect of it, but that's a different problem. And communicating with the business at that level, rather than, okay, we've got a customer table and we've got an accounts table and we have a foreign key from customer to accounts.
It's a
And
one
now
to
they're like,
many.
what does that mean? Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's a many to many relationship. It's a one to many, no. Right. That's the technical data modeling that, somebody's going to have to do if they're building out a relational database. But the conversation can be at a higher level than that. And, again, Roche Diagnostics decided they were going to use Data Vault to do that because they could diagram it. People didn't have to know it was a hub and a link, but they could see, okay, there's customer, there's account, and there's this link between them. And they could have a conversation around that as to, is this really the way the business operates? And then from there, they could then pass those as templates and then training and an approach to additional domain teams as they added more and more domain teams. And then everybody was, as they say, on the same page and communicating in the same style with regard to what they mean by the data and how we represent the data. And again, you can do that. It's really technology agnostic, which to me, I think is part of the key, and especially in the data mesh world, right? Is we need some ways of doing things that are not tied specifically to the technology we're using in a particular domain.
And this is kind of data literacy, right? Like, we all speak the same language. We talk about the same concepts. And one of the stories is one of the companies I worked for, we started building Data Vault, and we did the whole, like, just kind of like business focused data modeling. And what we realized is the software had a massive gap. Because when business was describing a problem, they're like, oh, there's this relationship between this and that. And we're like, oh, not in our software, it's not. So there was a massive miss in the product where we wanted to deliver it in, specific way, but we didn't because nobody went through that exercise of actually understanding what business is expecting and how it works in real life. So that's like such a great example of kind of like remove the tech, remove the platform, don't show up with SQL, don't show up with Python, just talk and draw like on a whiteboard or a napkin.
Yeah,
Or
absolutely.
Ellie.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Thank you for that, Veronica. But one thing I really loved both of your comments there. One thing I want to kind of say here also is that Veronica, as you mentioned, you spotted a gap or lots of gaps, I suppose, from your story in the data. And I think if we approach data modeling kind of only from sort of bottom up from the data sources we already have at hand, we will never spot those gaps because the whole universe only consists of what we have already. And especially now that in the mesh context, we should be closely operating together with the people responsible for the actual source systems as well. We should be in the same team in the domain and so on and so forth. So being able to understand that, hey, there's data needs that we're not covering at all is like super important. And I think this is also a kind of strong argument for doing kind of also top down modeling. And I just want to add also, Kent, to your comment on Data Vault, and so that I think regarding governance, what's nice about Data Vault is that it's kind of a governed way of doing modeling, right? And the point of governance, I think it was Donald Farmer that said this in a presentation some weeks ago, but the point of governance is not to make the right decisions, it's to make decisions in the right way. And exactly in similar way, the if you choose a data modeling language or a method or something, it's not about choosing the model itself. It's about choosing the way that you do modeling in a way that enables you to communicate with your other domains and so on and so forth. I think Zamak's book has a pretty clear line somewhere saying that in a data mesh there is no centralized data model, which always kind of makes me twitch a little. but the point is not that of course there is no data model there in a physical sense perhaps, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to model practically the whole thing piece by piece and connect those pieces together on the level of the model.
Yeah, and my interpretation of that in particular is that when she says there's no centralized data model, I mean, that's kind of the point of mesh, is getting away from a
Exactly.
single centralized team that could be a bottleneck. And, I've been at this long enough that I've been at companies that spent multiple years working on their quote unquote enterprise data model and never built a table in the database because they spent years arguing about what these things meant and really not making any progress. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, while there may not be a centralized data model, I think conceptually, though, there is an enterprise model. And if we're going to have an effective mesh, we need to understand the relationships between these different domains, which is the definition of a conceptual model. Bill Inman talked about subject areas back in the early days, in the mid 90s, when we were first building data warehouses. He said, don't do big bang. Well, right. Yeah. Don't do it all at once. Do it subject area at a time. Well, what's a subject area? Well, when you start looking at subject areas, pretty close correspondence to what we now call domains today, right? You had finance and you had marketing and you had sales and you had product and manufacturing. These were the subject areas, right? And you build them out one bit at a time. But overall, you still have to have that whole concept of how does sales relate to customers and to products and to manufacturing and to suppliers? And certainly we all know we need to understand supply chain better after the last couple of years. And you still have an enterprise view of the data, and that's what we call the enterprise model. It, arguably should not be built all at once and doesn't need to be built by a centralized team, but the teams need to be able to communicate. And I think, in particular, that's where Data Vault is very, very strong with the methodology that is used in Data Vault. And it's at such a low level of grain, the way we have these conversations with about the hubs and the links, and being business key focused or business attribute focused is really what we're saying there. that you can build a domain here and then build a domain there and then look at it and go, well, what's the relationship between those domains? Well, in Data Vault, that's called a link. That's a link object. And you can build those at any time, right? So you don't have to say, oh, well, we can't move on because we haven't figured out how this and this connect yet. Well, it doesn't matter, right? Right now, we're trying to deliver this data over here in this domain. We're trying to deliver this data over here in this domain. And if we've modeled it in a data vault method, we can go back later and it's not re-engineering now. It's additional engineering. It's another iteration where we can figure out what the relationships are and where is that data, which domain team owns that data about the relationship, and add it in later in order to join them together and perhaps build a new data product that's around the relationship between these two business domains rather than the independent data that each domain covers.
Yeah, and I think one of the kind of key things here is that what does decentralized mean really, or actually centralized? If you consider no centralized data model, okay, but we still kind of, as you said, we need the enterprise level understanding of what is, what exists where and how things are linked. So does that just simply mean that we don't have a centralized team making it? It's the domains that are doing it by themselves, right?
But they still have to have collaboration, which is another principle inside of
course.
data mesh, and certainly in the data ops world. I'm spending a lot of time talking about data ops and the philosophy of true data ops, and collaboration is key. If we're going to build marketplaces, we'll use Veronica's term there. I mean, if you're building a data product and you're going to put it in a marketplace, well, presumably there's somebody that wants to consume that data. And if there isn't, then you just wasted a whole bunch of time and money. So you have to have that communication again external to the domain team to know, and this is clear in the data mesh writings, is like you need to be building data products for the consumers of the data, right? And so you need to understand that. And you've got to understand those relationships. And if they want to consume the data in order to join it, for lack of a better term, to data they have in their domain, well, you kind of need to understand the relationship, because if they need a particular attribute in order to be able to hook your data to their data, well, we call that a relationship. And you've got to know it's there, because otherwise you build a data product that doesn't have the information they need to make it useful. So it all comes back to this with the modeling. And again, I think the data vault methodology in particular gives you a very precise and concise way of modeling that to make it easy so you're not re-engineering, because that's something we want to avoid. That's the thing that costs us money is building things and setting them in stone and going, oh yeah, we forgot about that. And then having to redo a lot of work, a lot of code, a lot of design in order to fix that particular problem. And many of the other modeling methodologies, there's significant overhead and what they call in the agile world technical debt that you get into is if you're using some of these other approaches and you find out a little later, something changed, the source system, the source data changed, the requirement from the customer changed. There's a lot more
business rule changed.
Business
right?
rule change, yes. Yeah, there's places where that becomes a bigger problem and more costly, even though you're doing it in a decentralized way, right? And then on top of that, because we're trying to do this in a decentralized way to be more efficient, if you don't understand and account for the relationships between the domains, then you are going to build isolated data silos and you don't have a data mesh. You are just back to data silos, which is one of the things we're trying to avoid going forward.
Veronika, you mentioned that you are a data vault, you like data vault and you're doing data products. So now that we are decentralizing the act of modeling itself, are we perhaps also decentralizing the actual storage of that data? So how do you deal with your data products? Do you have all the products modeled separately in tiny silos but interconnected, or do they exist all together somewhere? somehow?
So I haven't worked for a company large enough to truly do data mesh in the way that is described, truly like kind of like their own teams, creating product. But I love a lot of concepts that are coming out of it, right? Like I love, the data product focus. I love putting engineers together with business so they're collaborating and learning to kind of like speak the same language. So we work in squads, agile, each team is focusing on specific area. We're putting everything into the same place. I love Snowflake also, so been working with Snowflake for a few years, and it's information mart. Like we're delivering our product are delivered by information marts that have that kind of like marketplace quality, right? Like here's an object, this is what's in it, this is what is grain, these are all the fields that are in it. These are all business keys, and this is how you tie it across different information marts, and we collaborate, right? So important. I mean, there's nothing worse than kind of like teams meeting together and realizing that we have three different hubs for the same thing, uh, which happens. But again, the cool thing about Data Vault is it's very easy to kind of like add, fix, remove. It's very additive in nature. You have all of the data, you can reload it. We love it. We've you know refactored a few things in my few years of building Data Vault, so that's totally fine. But yeah, so again, I don't have experience building data mesh. I'll go into another rabbit hole. Growing up as a DBA and over the past 2 decades, people telling that they're killing DBAs for many reasons. Look, relational database is going to die. Long live NoSQL. But the reality was that software engineers don't like data modeling. They don't get it. Like it's just not there. Like they think differently, which I truly appreciate because it's not how I think. But they're like, oh, we're gonna just put everything into. So to me, it's like kind of like that's what I'm afraid a lot of people are taking data mesh is like, I'm gonna go into my own little silo. I'm gonna do whatever I want. I think I can do better than a team that specializes in data. So that's kind of like my worry. I think data mesh has a lot of great things. It brings to light a lot of kind of like limitations that we experience if we have a centralized team. But at the same time, I think a lot of companies are taking as like, oh, cool, we're just going to break everything up. Everybody's going to go into their own little area, build their own little thing, and we still can't put it all together because the integration is where the difficulty is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and the
go
subtext to
ahead.
there is your domain teams need, if not a data modeler, a data modeling savvy engineer. Right?
That was actually my point also, Kent. I was just saying that this kind of brings up a very important thing, I think, which is kind of the people aspect, the competencies aspect. So, all right, we decentralized, we set up domain teams, and we have the engineers working on, software engineers. We have the data engineers. We also expect them to do the modeling now, because who else explains what the domain is about? Other than the people actually working in that domain. So they need to know data modeling as well. So who's going to be doing that? How do we ensure that we have enough competence in a large organization to make that work actually?
It can just be like obvious here and realistic. Data modeling is hard. We're engineers, right? Like we all love to code. I know you guys. I love to code. This is difficult. Now you have to kind of like walk away from a keyboard and start
Talking to
talking to
people.
people and trying to understand industry that you might not, right? You have to talk to people that you might not actually understand. I worked for financial company once. I'm like, or agriculture company. I can't natively relate to that. So it takes some time and effort to actually truly understand what it is that we're trying to model. So let's just like truly, it's not easy.
Yeah, I think it's about soft skills pretty much in the end, right?
Yes. Yeah. When I first got into Data Vault, I actually took my entire team, it was a data warehouse team, but we took the project manager, the DBA, the report writer, the business analyst, and the ETL developer. We all went to the Data Vault training together so we could communicate on that. So it's not to say even that everybody on the team doesn't have to be a data modeler, but they need to understand the concepts, right? Because it is a team. Yeah, and again, we're getting, like you said, we're decentralizing, but the skill and the understanding has to be there if we're going to not build data silos. Is somebody has to have that higher level architectural view, preferably somebody on the team, so it's not, we don't want to get into these endless review cycles where I was worked someplace at one point where we had a technical architecture review committee, and everything had to go to them to get approved. And okay, if you had 3 different teams, then that committee was the one that went, oh, wait a minute, they're replicating work over there that this team is doing there, and they're the only ones that knew it all. And again, what did that create? A bottleneck. It was a centralized bottleneck. And I think the only way around that is you have to have people that understand how to do these things on the team. And that does mean on the people side, yeah, you have to invest in some skills. You have to invest in some development. You may have to get some outside coaching for the teams until they kind of get up to speed. Or you have like Roche has done, where they've got a central team that their role is not doing the work; it's empowering the domain teams to do the work, right? And it becomes kind of the support center, right? Oh, we're having a problem figuring out how to design this part of our data product. Do you have somebody that can come help us and coach us a little bit about that? And that gets back to the culture of the organization. And I just finished interviewing Miguel Morgado from OneWeb, they're doing data mesh on Snowflake with an automated data ops thing. And he said that was the biggest thing, is the culture, is getting everybody around the same page of understanding what data mesh means, what our goals are from a business perspective, and agreeing to operate in that manner, that we're not going to build data silos, right? That we're going to facilitate building a mesh, which by definition means that it's interoperable, that we can have data products in whatever form that others in the organization can consume. So again, we're back to the communication, we're back to the people, we're back to the process
back to
around
data
how they
culture, right?
data
Data
culture.
literacy, we're back to it's the people process kind of situation, not necessarily tools, right?
Right, exactly.
A tool is not going to solve it for us.
Yeah, totally. Even as a representative of a tool company, I fully agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a friend years ago that said it this way: a fool with a tool is still a fool.
Yeah, fully agree. Yeah, I think the culture issue is an interesting one, and it also has to do like with the whole setup is a culture thing, really. And Zama calls it the social technological framework or whatnot for a reason, I think. But especially with data modeling as kind of a profession or competence or something like that, I think the kind of perhaps old-fashioned way you still occasionally see here and there, that you have an enterprise architect somewhere in an ivory tower and they are creating their own fancy data models which no one else ever sees. It's kind of something that that doesn't work anymore. You can't do that, and of course that's completely incompatible with the mesh thing. I think, Kent, you said it well, that the kind of centralized team that coaches and helps people to figure this out, so that you can have those experts in the domains, or at least people with enough understanding that they can deal with their own domains models, and then you can have someone from the centralized team helping them out. Is completely different setup from that kind of top-down led EA thing that you still see, unfortunately, see here and there.
Yeah. We're trying to get away from the you feed us the requirements, go away.
Exactly.
We'll put our modeling hats on and we'll do this big enterprise model and we'll let you know when we're done, and then double check with you to make sure we got it right. Now that's what we're trying to get away
If
from.
you ask anybody who worked with me, like engineers, I'd be like, yeah, I'm sorry, you have to go to talk to the business people. You have to draw that kind of like semantic diagram. You actually also have to do that bottom up. I think I mean, it's honestly like unicorns. I want to hire unicorns, but the reality is like it's difficult, requires a set of like different skills. But I think if you're truly on the ground and doing it, you'll have appreciation, you'll understand the impact. Because when somebody's drawing something and somebody else is like, there's a lot of layers of, to me it's like a broken phone. Like tell you the word, and by the time it gets to the fifth person, it's a completely different word. So I was like, no, we have to be able to do everything to truly kind of deliver the best products.
Right. Yeah. One important aspect in this whole thing is the feedback loop, and we have to talk about that as well. So we are not doing top-down model everything, get everything right at once thing. We're also not doing silos where some DBA somewhere decides what the model is going to be, and then everyone lives with that. So ensuring that the feedback from the users of those data products that we create and the other domains and the people inside our domain, how does that build into the data modeling work and the kind of process around data models? Opinions, thoughts?
We're just being polite and letting each other. Kent, are you muted? Well, Data Vault has a feedback loop, but I'll go towards agile, right? Like agility of it. You deliver small increments fast, and then you involve your business users in testing it. I always keep like, this is a struggle. We want perfection. I mean, I don't know about you, but I want perfection, but you'll never get it perfect by yourself. The sooner you get it out, the sooner you get more eyes on it, the sooner you get feedback on your model, and it's very iterative. Just get it out fast. Small increments also means that you don't fail massively, right? Like, oh, you know, made a mistake somewhere. And honestly, our businesses change, our companies change, our thoughts change. Like, it's okay, it'll never be final or perfect, right? It's continuously iterative process.
Yeah, and I think there's from the government space long ago, they had a thing called total quality management, TQM, and that's actually been incorporated into the data vault methodology itself, and that's your feedback loop. In Agile, you do retrospectives at the end of every sprint, right? And then you figure out what went right, what went wrong, what do we need to do different. So you've got multiple levels of, the process. How do we go about doing it? Can we improve on that? But the model, like Veronika was just saying, is like, did we get the data right? Is this what you expect to see from the data? And all of that is part of this retrospective and this feedback loop. That's part of the methodology, and that's why it's important to have agreed upon methodology as well, whether it's Scrum or Kanban or some hybrid Scrumban. One place called it at one point. Various methodologies, or following the Data Vault methodology itself. You have to have that, right? In my world, in doing Data Vaults in particular, when I started doing those about a couple of decades ago now, one of the things that I found valuable was, onboarding the data quickly, which everybody gets today, right? They get we're in an ELT mode. We're no longer into ETL. We're going to bring the raw data in. When we talk about that, that's a data pipeline. That's what our data engineers do. We're going to, get that raw data in. And I was always trying to figure out, how can I get that data, the raw data, exposed to the business sooner rather than later. And depending on the technology you're using, putting views on it and extract it to an Excel spreadsheet. I did that one place where we dumped it into an Excel spreadsheet. As soon as the data was loaded, and we had the business was then looking at the source system and going, yes, this is the data we expected, or no, it's not. Because sometimes the extract program wasn't right. All the way back there. It's like, and like you said, Veronika, it's fail fast. That's one of those little agile phrases, is how quickly can we have somebody looking at it and keep that feedback loop very, very tight, so that further down the line, we don't go, oh man, we missed this. And then it costs a lot more to go all the way back. If your extract process had a problem and you're all the way down delivering a data product, that's a lot of rework, right? Potentially a lot of, or at least a delay. Maybe it's just a little work to fix the pipeline all the way down because it was back here. But you got to regression test everything then anyway, right? You've changed something here. Now you have to regression test everything. So it's going to take a lot longer. Rather, if you find it closer to the beginning of the project, or where the error is really happening by having a closed feedback loop, you save a lot of time and money, and you can be a lot more agile in that regard.
And I think that's where like the data mesh methodology really, like, you are already working with business. Just let them, like, give them that ownership. And like, to your point, like, we reduce the blast radius if we, like, our mistakes are small. And it's like, for me, like that's comfort level. Because I don't stress over it. I'm like, okay, I made a mistake. It's not a big deal. I can fix it. We caught it fast versus we caught it 6 months from now when, financial numbers were wrong, right? Like you don't want to be there. You kind of want to quickly fix it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to mention about feedback loops is that I find it extremely useful to have the feedback loop already happening when I'm still modeling, and that's, it's all about talking with the business, right? And before anyone has even coded anything, I can get feedback. I can show the model, say, okay, so customer has one or many more accounts, and they say, no, just one account. That's, can't have many, and I can already fix it there before anyone's done anything. So it's only my fancy diagram that I'm fixing at that point. And I think that's the shortest feedback loop you can possibly get, right? So
And
yeah, but
but also
yeah.
another story I love is like, don't show up to meetings unprepared. Like when you're just having this first conversation with business, draw something. You'll be surprised how quickly people will point out how wrong you are. But like the goal is that you walk out of that meeting and you're right? Like I keep telling, like, just it doesn't, you don't have to know this, you don't have to understand it. Just prepare something. Because when you leave that meeting, you will know what the right thing is. So, and that's like that fast feedback loop. People will be more than happy to tell you every every way your diagram is wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
totally.
I use that technique with when I was working at HP. I would just tell them, "Hey, I'm just the guy, the dumb guy from IT. You tell me what this means. I took my best guess. Don't feel bad about telling me it's wrong. Just go ahead and
Yeah,
tell me where I got it wrong and tell me where I got it right." And that worked great because people, like you said, people are always willing to tell you when they know more than you do.
I always use the example. Originally, I think this comes. This is a story by Alex Sharp. I'm not going to tell you the whole story here, but he always said that you need to ask the stupid question of what do you mean by this thing. And one example he used was something relating to railways, and he was in a big meeting room, and he asked, "Okay, sorry guys, but what do you mean by a train?" And that's a question that you can ask as a data modeler, because you're supposed to be the guy who doesn't know anything about the business. But surprisingly, every single person in that meeting room gave a different answer. So again, you're getting the feedback loop in right place by basically being stupid enough to ask the questions that people don't know to ask themselves.
Exactly.
we make a lot of, and you want to talk about customers. You will never don't show up and ask what is a customer. That'll
Yeah,
be a very, very long meeting.
yeah, absolutely. Making the implicit explicit was a comment from Scott. I fully agree. That's the thing. What do you mean by thing? Yeah.
Exactly.
Excellent. I think it's about time to start wrapping up a little bit. This has been very, very interesting. I think we're all in very much agreement here, not too much of a fight or anything. I think the core thing is that kind of the decentralized nature of the mesh is really just an, at least this is how I hear it, but correct me if you think differently. I think it's kind of an extra force, really forcing us to do modeling better than we perhaps have used to do it, and forcing us to put more emphasis on the kind of communication aspect of it, really, and talking to our own business guys, but also talking with the other domains and so on. So this is all, I think, something that enforces us to do even better modeling that we have been used to, and to have a modeling method that is somehow governed, something that we all have in common. We have our rules, ways of working, and so on set up around data modeling, and it's also something that has to exist in all those different domains. So quite, at least to some degree, quite demanding even possibly. And this, I think, is really perhaps a little bit different from what you kind of hear around there, where data modeling is perhaps not kind of a first-class citizen in the mesh. But I think what we've talked about here today, this sounds like it's super important, right?
For data mesh to succeed, right, you have to have a little bit of rigor. You have to have a commonly, you have to be able to speak the same language, right? And that's what the data model ultimately is.
Yeah, and I think to answer the explicit question of do you need to do data modeling if you're doing data mesh? Yes.
Yes,
You need to be
absolutely.
doing data modeling at some level, and as Veronika said, use your words.
Or if you're not doing data mesh, you still need to do data modeling.
There's no escape.
There's no escape. Yes,
No.
the history. The last 20 years in the industry, when we've tried to get away from data modeling, it always comes back because when you look at the challenges people have with understanding their data and getting value from their data, fundamentally, it comes down to them not understanding the data, and data modeling is our way of communicating the meaning of the data and understanding the data and making sure that everybody across all the domains can easily understand each other's data. You need a data model to do that.
Precisely. It's about communication. It's about shared understanding. It's about making that understanding visible and accessible to all. That's really what it is about. And it happens on all different levels, as we've discussed here. You have that general idea of what the enterprise kind of looks like from a data point of view, how the domains are interconnected. You have your domain and product specific decisions of how exactly are you going to structure your data for a particular use case, maybe. But these are all kind of interconnected. They're all part of the overall drive to have your data actually documented and modeled and thus kind of usable in the first place. Thank you. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Veronika. Thank you, Kent.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yeah,
And
totally.
I guess, Kent, how do we find you? I think you've been busier than ever. I see you everywhere. Well, clearly I follow you.
You can find me online. The best way is to find me on LinkedIn. If you're watching and listening to this podcast, send me a connection request and say, "Hey, I heard you on the Data Mesh podcast talking about data modeling." And then I do have my blog, which I do occasionally post some things on at kentgraziano.com. And then you can also follow me on Twitter.
Wonderful. How about you, Veronika?
I am mostly hanging out on LinkedIn, so please do connect. I'm always happy to connect. And I'm part of various Slack communities, so you can find me on DBT, Locally Optimistic. There's a new Data Camp Slack community as well. So yes, feel free to reach out. Always happy to connect.
Oh, and don't forget the Data Vault user group.
In the Data Vault user group, and I also, a plug, yes, and I run Snowflake Data Vault user group, so please follow me. You'll get hopefully great updates. I try to share as much knowledge as I can.
And then there's DataVaultAlliance.com, which is the new home for everything related to Data Vault 2.0. So if anything we've said about Data Vault is interesting to you and you want to follow up more on that, go to DataVaultAlliance.com.
Excellent. Very good guidance there. You can also find me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. And you can find also all sorts of blogs, posts, and videos and whatnot on Ellie.ai. So do track me as well. At this point, I think it's time for us to close this. Thank you again. It's been super great. I hope we can do this again sometime. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Melissa, for helping us set this up in practical ways for all the logistics. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.